Tracey Keele. I am a partner with KPMG. I am in our management consulting practice. My specialty is culture transformation and behavioral change management. So this is kind of my jam. My mission is really helping organizations to do just what we've talked about today, to really inspire and enable their people to unlock their fullest potential. Chief Simmons, I love what you said about the inner and the outer space. So that's really the kind of work that we try to do. So before I introduced our esteemed panelists, I just want to kind of set the stage for what our discussion is going to look like. We are focused on Guardian identity and culture, and we're going to break our discussion down into really 3 segments today. So we're going to start by talking about why it's so important and urgent. So we started to talk about this a little bit already in our previous conversations. Secondly, we're going to talk about the role of the leader, the role the leader plays in that. And then third, we're going to talk about the things that enable that cultural identity or stand in the way of it. All right, so we're going to be throwing around the C word a lot today, culture, and just wondering if anyone could offer up a definition for culture. There are many of them, so I'd love to hear from the audience any definitions you want to offer up. How do you think about culture? What do you think it means? I know our panelists are dying to jump in here.
How you define yourself, how you, sense of place. Oh, sense of place, sense of, sense of belonging, and, as they were saying before, kind of what your story is.
That's great, Sally. So your identity, your environment, your sense of place, how you do things, how you think, how you operate. Any other definitions?
The behavior of the organization.
The behavior of the organization. Great. One of my favorites is the worst behavior that you tolerate. It's a little bit of a provocative one. But this is a really important topic, culture. So I just wanted to kind of set the stage so we all know what we're talking about up here. I'm really excited to introduce this esteemed panel. And I'm sure many of you know these guys, but I'm going to introduce them anyway. So I'm going to start with Chief Master Sergeant Willie Frazier. So Chief Frazier is the Senior Enlisted Leader for SSE, Space Systems Command. So Willie, thanks so much for being with us today. We also are joined by Chief Master Sergeant James Seballes. So Chief Seballes is the Senior Enlisted Leader of STARCOM. And then we have retired Chief Master Sergeant Boston Alexander. So Chief Alexander retired after a very distinguished career in the Air Force. And his culminating assignment was Peterson-Schreiber Command Chief. And he was also really involved in the early planning initiatives to stand up the Space Force. And then we have Colonel Klock. So Colonel Klock is newly minted Commandant of the NSSI, the National Security Space Institute. He is also a bit of a newbie around here. He's a new Guardian, an inter-service transfer, like Chief Simmons mentioned, coming over from the Army. And then last but certainly not least, my colleague, Kyle Bodt. Kyle is a director here at KPMG in our management consulting practice, and he's really an expert in human-centered design and culture change. So we have a fabulous discussion in store today. So please join me and give them a very warm welcome. All right, so we shall dive in. And Chief Seballes, I'm going to start with you.
All right.
So clearly, General Bratton talked a lot about STARCOM's focus on this topic of identity and culture. And right after STARCOM was stood up, you guys dove into this topic head first. I was wondering if you could kind of build on the previous comments and share why you in particular feel this is such an important topic and an urgent one to get after.
Yeah, I think what's of obvious importance because, as a new service, we're working through trying to build out that identity. And if we don't know who we are, we don't know who we are, not just as a service, but individually within our different roles, it's going to be really hard for us to espouse that out and for people to understand truly what we do and what we bring to the fight. And so that's really kind of what it boils down to, at least in my opinion. The reason it's so critical to us is because, again, so many things, as General Bratton touched on earlier this morning, we still are pretty heavily reliant on the Air Force for a lot of things. And that's just because of the nature of our size and how we're built. And so we're also working through developing and building out the things that we need from the Air Force that are tailored to what we need in the Space Force. And so all of that comes back to culture. And so it's one of those things that if we don't get that right, the other pieces may not quite fit in as we hope to.
Great, thank you for that. Chief Frazier, I'm going to transition over to you and the SSE. So the SSE is the biggest of the field commands, and you have quite a diverse workforce, a largely civilian workforce, and would love to hear from you with the focus on the future fight. Really, how do you mobilize and focus that diverse workforce on the mission, on the purpose?
So what my boss, Lieutenant General Gutlein, has done is he has kind of informed the workforce that there's a fight coming with one of our adversaries by 2026. That's the best measure of when we think the fight's going to go down. And so what we've done is we've taken our courtyard, and in our courtyard we have banners at SSC that tell you what all the different threats are. And the purpose of that is when you come to work, we want you thinking about the threat, and when you go home, we want you thinking about the threat, because the threat is real and most people don't understand that. As a matter of fact, what we used to do is we would have, you would get a threat briefing once a year at your classification level. And what General Gutlein has done is taken that threat briefing and now we get it once a month. So I'll get mine next Tuesday at the SAP level. I will get a threat briefing as I did last month and the month before. And so what that does is it kind of keeps your eyes on the prize and makes sure that, people understand, especially in Space Systems Command, because we take things from idea to orbit, if that makes sense. So from two people scratching down what they think the next system should look like, all the way until we launch that system into orbit, or even the ground systems, that's our job at SSC. And we talked about our budget earlier today, the Space Force budget. Well, Space Systems Command controls 11 of the $18 billion that Space Force has every year. So it's imperative that we integrate with the warfighter and figure out what they need and drive that culture to our people so they understand every day, because there's no launch pad like at LA Air Force Base. There's no launch pad. There's no flight line at LA Air Force Base. So keeping our intellectual property, which is basically what we do on the installation, keeping those people motivated is what we do.
So trying to make it really ever-present, really tangible,
Yes.
really reinforce it through your physical space, but also through your leaders' messages kind of day in and day out.
Yep. And we reinforce whenever we can. So I'm pretty sure every time you hear my boss talk, he will talk about the 2026 fight. Every single time, guaranteed.
And is that trickling down to other leaders? Are they doing the same thing?
It does, and he has pushed the responsibilities down to the lowest level, as the general spoke about earlier, to the lowest level, 05s. What he tells people is he wants you to run fast with scissors downhill. Do it, get it done. If you have to ask him for permission, then what I always ask the commanders is, if you're asking the boss for permission, then why are you there? You're a board-selected commander, and it's your responsibility to take risk whenever you can and then he will vector you if he feels that you need vectoring. But most of the time, as long as it's not illegal, immoral, or anything along those lines, he's going to let you do what you need to do and be a commander, because he has to focus on the up and out, whereas his commander should be focused on the down and in.
Well, this topic of, shifting, making a behavioral shift to more risk-taking is one I definitely want to come back to.
Okay.
As part of our discussion. Kyle, question for you. So you're an expert in human-centered design. Can you just
Okay.
can you tell us what that actually means and how it relates to this topic of identity and culture?
Sure, absolutely. So expert, I like to think of myself as somebody who's continually learning. So I do, sorry, I lost it. There we go. I do focus on this quite a bit, and there is a really key correlation between human-centered design and culture and identity within organizations. So thinking about human-centered design in the most simplest terms, right, it's about solving problems in the context of humans, right, and putting humans at the center of everything that you're doing to solve that problem. Oftentimes when people think about human-centered design, they think about it in the context of building a software product, right? Or building a service. And you can also apply it to building experiences. And that's one of the things that I really like to kind of focus in on, because when you think about cultures within organizations, they're workforce experiences, right? So when somebody shows up to work every day, when a guardian shows up to work, and they have to understand what their identity is and what their culture is, it's what they experience day to day, every day, that really creates that workforce experience for them. And the other thing that's really important about that is that, the best cultures are actually really intentionally built, right? Culture as a whole, when you think about it, it's what the guardian and what the service member or what the employee brings to the equation, but it's also how that culture has been architected to elicit the behaviors that you're looking for, right? And so when you think about human-centered design and how it relates, it's all about using a human-centric approach to architect the best culture for that particular organization. And what's really important about that is that as part of that process, it's co-creative, right? You want to hear from the voice of the employee or from the guardian. And in order to do that, what that allows you to do is it creates this experience of somebody's invested, right? They're invested in building what that experience is. And it's a way to reduce risk. It's a way to drive adoption. And it's a way to really get everybody on board with what that experience is meant to be. So that's kind of how they're related in my mind.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
That little lesson. Human-centered design. It's a topic that comes up a lot, and I think it's important to understand again how to leverage that as an enabler to driving culture. So Colonel Klock, you mentioned that you are newer to the Space Force, but not new to space operations, coming over from the Army. And given your recent transition, would love to hear kind of what went into your decision to join the Space Force.
Sure.
What were your expectations as a new guardian, or what that experience would be? And then more broadly, thinking about your role in the NSSI, like why is this topic so relevant to your team?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And thanks for the opportunity to talk about being an inter-service transfer. I spent 32 years in the Army before I transferred to the Space Force, which was like 3.5 months ago. Some of that time was as a reservist, which makes all this possible without timing out. So I'll try and keep it brief, but a lot went into the decision. First, I incorrectly assumed when I knew that there was going to be a Space Force that for sure all of the space professionals from every other service would have to be harvested and put into the Space Force to create. How else could you create a whole new service for space without harvesting? I was dead wrong on that. The Army cites 1947 as, where we gave up all of our Army Air Corps, and then we had to create our new, mostly rotary wing Air Force of our own. So So the Army, and I think rightly so, as I look back on it, is keeping their space professionals, their FA-40s, which is what I was since 2006. So I thought I was gonna have to be part of the Space Force, and when I realized that wasn't happening, I was like, well, I should probably volunteer to do this. I've been doing space operations since 2006. Now there's a whole service dedicated to the thing I've been working on for 16 years. And it was just like, I was for sure gonna do it as soon as the opportunity presented itself. And when it did, and I read the paperwork, and what I had to sign was that I resigned my commission in the United States Army. That gave me a lot of pause. And I thought maybe I should really think about this more and talk to some mentors about whether this is smart or dumb for me to do. But in the end, I did it. I have no regrets. Many people ask me even today, you know, is it different wearing this uniform? Well, yeah, it fits differently, but I've been doing space operations for so long that it's not that much different to me to be in the Space Force. To talk about my first Space Force job as the Commandant of the NSSI, it's great. It's a wonderful job. When it comes to, sorry, let me go back. I forgot an important part. At least 50% of the reason why I wanted to transfer in the first place, I talked about, I've been doing space operations, now I want to be part of the service that does this, is that I've been in the Army a long time, and I have a warfighting culture, I believe. Everybody in the Army does, small unit tactics and is really trained to be infantry from the get-go, and then you move on to your specialties. So I thought I had something to give to the Space Force, which I recognized pretty early on. Like, this culture needs to be different than Air Force Space Command's culture, needs to diversify, and so I thought I had something to give. I think I do still. And so I'm very passionate about this idea of culture. And so I think I'm well positioned in the NSSI to help spread the whatever we think the Space Force culture should be. I'm most interested in the warfighting culture, which I think is probably the harder part of everything. But I get a lot of students through our doors, and so I think this is just a great first job in the Space Force, and I'm super happy to be here.
And I understand that throughput is going up a bit.
It is. I shared with you our numbers. For years, we taught just basically 2 courses, Space 200, Space 300. And so around 2019, when everything started, when the demand signal went up because we created a Space Command, we created a Space Force, now we're teaching, or under development, or we'll be teaching soon, 23 courses. So explosive number changes in the number of courses, and then the number of students have as equally exploded. So business is good.
Excellent. Chief Alexander, you're not going to get off the hook here. Why do you think, as a retired chief, why do you think culture matters so much to what the Space Force is trying to achieve?
So let me say first, it's a personal and professional honor to be here.
And I'll repeat, it's a personal and professional honor to be here this afternoon. Thank you for your question. Thanks to KPMG, thanks to the NSSA, and to my home team partners in air and space. You say retired, right? I'm not so sure I know what that means. I would say I transitioned from wearing a uniform to wearing another uniform. Both would fit quite well, but I believe this is a little bit more comfortable. To attack your question, I wish I had perhaps half the afternoon to do so. But I look at this and look at it in this way. 1, it's an imperative. 2, the fierce urgency of now. 3, it's education for the American people and also for our guardians at large. So let me try to go Clausewitz here for a second. Clausewitz would say, thus then, everything in strategy is simple, but on that account not easy. So let me say, I believe most things in culture, simple, but on that account not easy. where we should execute, where we should focus sometimes, we tend to maybe take our eyes off the ball. We tend to go, hey, this will work itself out. Well, you'll get what you inspect, and you'll get what you deliberately create, right? Or you'll get what will morph over time. Here's where we are. Whether it's fight tonight, fight 5, 10 years from now, whether it begins in space, whether it's across air, cyber, maritime, whatever the domain, the strategy could be robust. The technology could be well advanced. The people, you could have provided training and other resources, but if your culture is not right, that's probably all for naught. Your culture executes all of that. That's why it's that important. Fierce urgency of now? Well, I'll just say simple. I'm not trying to speak Mandarin. And I read earlier this week, whether it's in diplomacy, information, military, or economic, China is stepping up their game. We have to win, I believe, before we go to war. Not go to war and seek to win. So we have an opportunity, I believe, not that it's going to happen overnight, but to shape this. Because we spend money on strategy. We spend money on other weapon systems, because the human is a weapon system. We spend money on weapon systems. Money, of course, on technology. I am afraid that on the culture front, we're not as focused as we should be. And I like for us to be where we need to be, or where we ought to be, should it go down tonight. That's my answer.
Excellent. Well, on that note, we are going to transition to the role of the leader. So it's urgent and important. I think we've established that clearly through the discussion. So I'm going to pose a question to Chief Frazier and Chief Alexander. What is the role that leaders play in setting direction and establishing that foundation for culture change?
So, in my opinion, the leader sets the tone. The leader sets the tone of these are my expectations, this is where we need to get, and I expect all of you to execute. The leader gives everyone the tools and the resources that they need to get that done. And sometimes it looks different. It's different for different leaders, and we adapt to different leadership styles because that's our job. And so if that leader is also responsible for instilling trust. So they have to instill the trust that the followers will be supported no matter what avenues that they choose. And so again, it goes back to pushing down responsibility to the lowest possible level and making people feel comfortable that they will be supported when they make those decisions, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. We're not going to Monday morning quarterback you unless you do something that makes us need to Monday morning quarterback you. But let's find out after the fact, if that makes sense. Who said it earlier? You don't get to start a war as a specialist 3. Right, an E3, you don't get to start a war doing that. But you do have the responsibility to let your leaders know that, hey, based on what your expectations that you set forth, this is what I see. And if you don't do that, then it gets caught up in the frozen middle, and then we never hear about it when there's something that we could have done about it. What do you got, Boston?
So I like your comment on setting the tone. The leader must walk the talk. Who we are, I'll just say who we are, right? My last job was in the Space Force, so I'm going to say we, and I'm just going to live with that. And you should too. What do we value? What do we recognize? What do we celebrate? What or whom do we reward? The leader must be able to step out front and ensure that that's baked into every fiber of the being of a guardian. We've got to be marching to the same drum beat. What do we do? Space is sexy. And we need to ensure that the world knows that it's sexy. Right? We've got to be able to do that. If you think about it, right? All right, the Air Force, and I'm going to take you back, bear with me for history for a second. Desert Shield, Desert Storm. The air war was won, essentially in about 24 hours. Why? Because our Air Force was that powerful, right? Would you say so?
Yeah.
Show of hands, would you say so? You're wrong. You're missing a piece of that. It's because, yes, it was our Air Force, but because of our space effects. So we could put warheads on foreheads, fit them through windows, turn bad people into ear, teeth, and eyeballs in record time, and make it back to wherever we were staying for steak and lobster night. I get fired up about this because I believe it, right? Space itself, right, with our Air Force, can generate effects at the tactical, operational, strategic level of warfare simultaneously. No other force can. Space underpins our American way of life. How many of us are running around and letting people know that's what we do? Right? There needs to be more. So you touch who, you touch what. And I'm still on the role of the leader, right? Because the leader's got to be able to trumpet that. Attitude, as they say in Remember the Titans, reflects leadership. So if I'm walking around letting people know I am a champion, I'm a part of a champion team, then everybody is eating, breathing, exhaling, inhaling that. That's what it's about. And then why? Because when people know why they're doing, what's the why? When people are clear on the why, then what they must do to achieve that why, see, it becomes a little bit easier. So for the leader, set the tone, clearly define, bake it into who we are, ensure that what is clear, and ensure that the why, purpose, is articulated.
Well, Chief, I think you did a really nice job illustrating what good leadership looks like and how you inspire others and how you show commitment. That's very clear. And Kyle, this is a tough act to follow.
It is a tough act to follow. My goodness, I got to follow Chief here.
So we have talked a lot about what good leaders must get right to enable culture change. And I don't know if there's anything you want to put stump or anything new there. But also, interestingly, it'd be great to draw out where leaders typically falter. I mean, Chief Frazier talked about building trust, and there are things that could go wrong in this process.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And I think I'll start with the second part, right? So I'll take this in reverse. And where do we falter, right? Where do leaders falter? And the biggest thing really that I see in the work that I do and all the different clients that we have in this space is something very similar, well, not similar, it's exactly to what General Bratton was talking about earlier in his keynote, which is the say-do gap, right? Basically saying one thing and then maybe doing something else. And you know what? That doesn't have to be intentional. And I'll give you an example. Where I see it kind of happening with clients all the time is, particularly in a culture setting, we'll start a culture transformation and then everybody gets all excited about it, right? It's a very important thing. Everybody wants to be involved. Everybody wants to have their say in what's happening with that transformation. And you pull people in, you start to create a vision, you start to create a future state, something that everybody can build and be around. And then unforeseen circumstances, right? Maybe there's budget, maybe there's something else, maybe it just, gets to a lower priority for other things that are happening within the organization. And the people that are left there who provided their input, who you collected data from, thinking about it from a human-centric perspective, are left wondering, well, why did you spend all my time and collect all this data? What am I getting out of that? What am I seeing, right? And so that therein creates that say-do gap unintentionally by not kind of continuing on that process and getting to a place where you can see those actionable results for that transformation that you're actually embarking upon. And so what that does, what you were talking about, Chief Frazier, it dilutes trust, right? And it makes people, question the organization as a whole. And so from a leadership perspective, if you find yourself in that position where you have to make a choice, right? Culture really isn't subpar to strategy, right? It's on par with strategy. You need both of those things to succeed in corporate America, to succeed in the fight. And so making sure that you don't do that. I think coming back to what leaders do well or what works really well is something that you were talking about, Chief. It's just this, I want to foot stomp the idea of role modeling, right? You have to role model what you expect from the folks that are in your organization. And there's lots of different ways to do that, right? It's, as Chief was talking about, it's standing up and it's being that herald for what you expect that organization to be and what you want to see from the folks that are in that organization. But there's also a lot of different ways to role model. A short example here from something that we actually did internally from KPMG's own culture transformation was that the idea that we do care about each and every one of our employees, right? And so one of the things that we rolled out was this idea of how do we give feedback better? How do we bring people along better, right? And so we started to look at the ideas that were put out there by Kim Scott and Radical Candor, right? Caring passionately, caring deeply, and giving feedback in the time, in the moment, from a place of caring, but giving feedback that's actionable and that folks can take with them and move forward with. And so that's an example where, I see leaders role model that all the time here at KPMG. And that's really, really important. It's a really great example of how you can role model what you expect your organization to be moving forward.
Yeah, it's a really good illustration of actions speak louder than words.
That's right.
Because a lot of people, at times, people don't believe it when you say it, but when you do it and they feel it, that builds real credibility and belief. Chief Seballes, I'm really interested in your reactions to this discussion and reflecting too upon what you've heard from your own senior leaders in the Space Force and what they want and need to be successful.
So what exactly the leaders are looking for to be successful? In my experience so far in the Space Force, and even going back to my time in the Air Force, is just clear, transparent guidance, right? Too often, the guidance that we get is a tad bit bureaucratic. It's sometimes a bit diplomatic, and somewhere in between there, you're left to kind of read in between the lines what that actually means. And so then what happens there is it'll trickle down, and then people will make their own interpretations of what it actually means. And so then when they are role modeling this behavior, they may think they're doing what is intended of them, but it wasn't clearly articulated to them. And so then now you create this huge telephone game to where the individual members at the unit level or below are living a completely different culture because that's what's been trickled down to them. And then to undo that is not as easy as just replacing a leader or even changing the narrative, right? Because I think we touched on it in one of the other conversations. Culture isn't built by what General Bratton and I say in STARCOM, like the message that we put out, that's not how it gets changed. It gets changed by the individuals who work together side by side in those units, in those organizations. I often joke about, culture is built at 2 o'clock in the morning when you're on crew with your partners to the left and right of you, when you've probably had too much caffeine, and then the stories come out, right? And your real opinions of everything come out, right? And then that becomes the thing. And so I would, again, go back to that clear, transparent direction. This is what we mean. And then foot stomp it, right? You have to continue to follow up and follow through to use an EPME model, right? To unfreeze, change, and then freeze. Mm-hmm. The biggest place where we falter is in the freeze and the follow up and follow through. Right, we say the right words, we get out there, we say it a few times, we push out the directive, but then we fail to continue to follow up that messaging, to continue to follow up with the examples and make sure that we're doing it right. Another aspect that I think that senior leaders would like is, when we do institute some of these changes, that it's not just a bumper sticker, or it's a, kind of using I guess a different perspective is, you probably don't want me trying to teach the work of Mr. Bodt. I'm not a specialist, or I'm not an expert, I don't have the credentials, I haven't gone to school. To give me a brief and then expect me to give that brief out to other people, it's not gonna get delivered properly. Things just naturally get lost in translation anyway. And so we as a service then have to invest in that development. And again, it has to start at the beginning, whatever that beginning path is, whether you're officer, enlisted, or civilian, and then deliberately weaved over the career of that guardian, whatever that span is. Again, following through and rebeating that drum.
And Chief Frazier mentioned this term frozen middle, and I'm curious your thoughts on that and thinking about what this looks like at that supervisor level. Is it any different, anything further there?
Yes, again, I'll go back to what I started off with, right? If the leader is not transparent when it comes down and it gets translated to that middle, sometimes the frozen middle isn't just being difficult, they may not have clarity. And so what I've experienced so far in the Space Force is we sometimes fall back to what we know. It's just human nature. And as each of us on the panel, at least in the Space Force, and still in the Space Force, we've been doing this for a long time. I've been serving for 28 years. And it takes a lot. I mean, there's science behind it. How do you actually change behavior? It's not as easy as just one thing. And so that frozen middle may not be malicious. They just don't know how to change. And so I go back to, again, and you can't have another uniformed person necessarily teaching another one how to do that change. Sometimes we have to seek experts in industry and academia to help break through that. But that is what I've seen with regards to the frozen middle at times.
Great. So Colonel Klock, with all of that in mind and all of the challenges that we've laid out and the fact that change is really hard and it is constant, what role do you feel the NSSI plays in really growing and enabling cultural and change leaders?
What a great panel, because I have so many comments about so many things that were already said, so I'll try and hit as many as I can. So space is a warfighting domain. We've all heard that, but also victory begins in the mind. And so my role as the NSSI Commandant, I like to focus on that. If I can make the DoD service members and the Guardians specifically that come through my doors smarter, the reason why I'm doing all of that is because they need to take that knowledge, outthink the enemy, go back to their units and impart that knowledge on their crewmates. And so that is why this is important. The NSSI's role, as I talked about a little bit earlier, with this last FY, we had 5,300 and some odd students come through the schoolhouse. That's up from, I think 800 in years past, about 800 and some before the creation of Space Command, Space Force. So huge opportunity to influence a lot of service members coming through the doors. Of those, I think 1,400 and some were Guardians this last FY. So, a decent percentage actually of the Guardian uniformed service members. And over the next few years, it's reasonable to expect I will see an ever increasing number of Guardians coming through the door. So I've developed, it's a bit of a draft, but I've developed kind of a mantra. My role here is to greet every class that comes in, welcome them to the school, and to tell them why it is they're here. Ask them why it is they're here, and finally get to space as a warfighting domain. Victory starts in the mind. And then to kind of reiterate what Chief Seballes says, then reiterate that. And so for every class welcome, for every class graduation, that is what I do, is to make sure that they understand why they're here. They're not here to take a course and to be smarter. They are, but why? And that is because the threat is real, we talked about, and make them believe through my mantra that they are a warfighter, that they have to believe that. It's true that they are, but they have to believe it too. So, thanks.
That's Great. Well, I'm going to stick with you as
All
we transition to talking about enablers and barriers, and we've already started to move into this space. But taking your experience from the Army, what do you think you can bring that will help enable this differentiated identity and culture? And how are you building that into your NSSI priorities?
Right. So actually, we did some analysis on the report that KPMG created that said, like, here's some actionable recommendations for coming up with Space Force culture. We did some analysis on that and came up with several things near, mid, and long term that the school can do to help get after some of that. Some of it is very simple, creating, you've all seen these inspirational posters with like an eagle flying and it's got a word integrity or something. So having those, but for each of the 4 C's, is something that we're absolutely going to get after and hang them in the classrooms. These will be visible reminders to people. We've got a great graphics designer, so I'm sure they'll be fantastic. Similarly, we'll have cards, plastic cards that don't wear out in somebody's pocket. They'll have the 4 C's on one side and maybe pieces of my mantra on the back side, like why is it here? Why is education, why is space education so important in a warfighting kind of context? Many other things that we're going to enact, but.
Because what you're talking about there in terms of like posters and the little reference cards is your guardians have to know your values to live them. So it's like starts there, right? They've got to know what they are, and hopefully over time they don't need those aids.
Right, but there'll be new guardians coming in all the time that will need those. And, I value, a little bit off topic, but I valued a plastic card that I received when I first went through Space 200 back in 2006. And it has the classical orbital elements on there, and I thought this was great. And then a fellow soldier didn't have one and needed it, and I gave it away. Now we don't make those things anymore. So I think those are, depending on your personality, those might be things that you would really hang on to and kind of cherish. And help, constant reminders of your culture. So of that list of things that we're going to do for the schoolhouse, when it comes to education, I struggle a little bit with the warfighting culture. There's lots of things we can do to make us feel part of a team, and this is common need, but getting after the warfighting and making a space operator feel like a warfighter when they're so detached geographically from the fight that will happen on orbit is the thing I struggle with. So coming from the Army, I'm going to do some maybe crazy things, like I'm taking the whole, there's only 16 military in the NSSI out of 100 contractors, but we're all going to go to the small arms range and we're going to qualify with rifles and pistols. Are they ever going to do that in combat for real? Well, maybe, but hopefully not. But will this inspire them to know this is the type of activity that we're supporting when we're doing our Space Force operations? Hopefully. So I don't know if that'll be smart or dumb, but we're doing it because it feels like we're fighting, and we're going to do a bunch of other stuff that just feels natural to me coming from the Army. Like, this is the thing, we were talking about collective training. Nobody used the term collective training. I'm like, yeah, of course we do collective training. That's what the Army does. Oh, wait, this isn't the Army anymore. So I have to, I take some things for granted because of my upbringing, that I have to constantly remind myself, oh, this is an important thing that might have value and use to the Space Force.
Yeah, and I like the idea of not letting perfect get in the way of progress. And General Bratton, you talked about, we're going to try some things and not everything's going to work, but that's okay. We'll learn from it. We'll get stronger. Thank you. Chief Frazier, over to you. So you had talked a little bit about running downhill with scissors earlier, and the shift that you're trying to affect towards, from kind of risk aversion to more measured risk-taking, and was wondering how that's going and what's enabling that change and what's standing in the way.
So I think it's going well. One thing you have to understand is we come from a background of Air Force Space Command. And in Air Force Space Command, some people were missileers. And in the missile field, you have an option of turn this key, do this sequence of things, follow the checklist, do it that way, and that's it. Otherwise, you're getting paperwork or fired or whatever. And so we have to appeal people away from that and say, hey, this is a brand new service. We kind of do what we want. And, you know, people say, well, we haven't always done anything because we're almost 3 years old. There's no always. There's no, we used to do it this way. It isn't a thing. And so what we need to make sure of is, again, that we reiterate that trust, and then the members have a responsibility to be loyal. And when I say be loyal, what that means is you should be focused on what it is that we're trying to accomplish. You should be focused on, somebody said it earlier, and I say this all the time, if you want to speak Mandarin, it should be because you want to speak Mandarin, not because you have to. And so if we don't instill this culture of let's get after the adversary, and that's what we should be focused on, and sometimes we focus on just really random, strange things like, I don't know, what kind of buttons are we going to have on our uniform? Like, what does that have to do with bringing the fight to China and Russia? Like, let's think about that, and then let the people whose job it is to design buttons, and then we'll show it to you later. And if you don't like it, then you go on Reddit and complain, and then, you know, we start the cycle all over again. And so making sure that our people are focused is like the number one thing we can do to instill culture. I'll tell you a real quick story. Hopefully it'll be quick. When I first got to SSC, don't tell anybody this. When I first got to SSC, I know, I don't want to see it on Reddit later. I trust you guys. All right. So when I first got to SSC, it was a Wednesday. And I said, hey, everybody in the front office, on Friday at 1500, we're all going to have a beverage. Okay, that's it. So on Friday at 1500, I showed up and I handed everybody a beverage, and they're all clickety-clacking on their computers, and they looked up at me and they said, oh, thanks, Chief. And then they just went back to work. Well, that wasn't the point. So I handed one to my boss, who's now retired, and he was like, that's what I'm talking about, Chief, thank you. And, you know, we had our beverages. Well, the next week, I did the same thing. By the third week, people were like, Chief, is it 1500 yet? Right? And so we were able to establish that culture, and they still do it. They'll send me a picture tomorrow of them having beverages at 1500 because I'm not there. Actually, I will be there. But it's one of those things that, what are you doing? How are you making yourself available? What exactly is going on? They have to have something that they can rally around. And when you look at, you know, Semper Fi, do or die, right? Every Marine there's no such thing as an ex-Marine. When you see a Marine, you know what you're getting, whether they're retired, active duty, they did 2 years, they went to jail, whatever it was, you know that you're getting a Marine. And so us falling under the Department of the Air Force, how are we gonna be the Marine? Like when I see a Marine, I don't think Navy. And when you see me, yeah, the chassis is the same as the Air Force, but the buttons and the rankings, there's some differences there, right? And so, but eventually we will get there, and there will be no doubt that we are a separate service, and we have a responsibility to build that culture now, instill it in them in basic training, and keep instilling it in PME, as James said, and then keep it going throughout their entire career. And as long as we can do that, we are definitely going to be successful, and that the culture will stick.
Yeah, and I love what you said about the example that you gave. I mean, it's a really simple example, but building sort of this routine. And we talk about routines and habits and rituals.
Small things to
how
look
you
forward
drive.
to. Sometimes that's all they need.
Right.
Small things matter.
Yeah.
Small things matter.
Yeah, Chief Alexander, anything you want to add here in terms of thing that you think is missing from the top enablers or barriers?
I don't know that I'd say missing, but I will add. The view, and as we look at this, right, we're not just doing this because the uniforms look nice or we're here just repetition, right? We're showing up and we're hoping, my good friend Chief Simmons mentioned earlier, Lord knows we wish, right? We don't wish for a 9/11 event in space. We're hoping there won't be a Pearl Harbor moment. But while we're praying for peace, we must be prepared for war. And we've got to understand and can't step away from it that we exist. The Space Force, Air Force, all branches of the armed forces exist to fight and win wars. We must stay laser focused on that. It can't be because, well, I don't care what you do inside that chain. We're as strong as our weakest link. And whatever your job is, if you're not bringing it. So leaders must be able to motivate. Leaders must be able to inspire. And I'm gonna really briefly here touch on, right, as I think General McLaughlin laid out earlier, and we talked about what S1 did by publishing the Guardian Ideal. Those 4 C's are pretty powerful, absolutely powerful. I'll start with courage. Personal and professional courage. You've got to be willing to stand alone, make tough calls, even when the tough calls are not the popular calls. Is it right for the nation? Is it right for the force? Is it right for the globe in some cases? Commitment. In this era of great power competition, you can't manage people into combat or perilous situations. They must be led. And if they're not committed, good luck leading them. You might be going to lunch, and if you're paying, they're probably not following. But you must build a culture of commitment. Connection. It's connection guardian to guardian. It's connection to systems. It's connection to industry. It's connection to our joint partners, our allies, you name it. It's connection on multiple levels. Let's think through. It's not just, hey, I'm connected to my device. Character. Best described and defined. Honesty, loyalty, integrity, selflessness, the building blocks of character. And I'd like to circle back to commitment before I roll out. One of my personal heroes, Dr. King. Let's talk commitment. And I'm not saying anyone, I wish long life for everyone. But Dr. King, the cause he was fighting for, Dr. King knew that they were going to kill him. He absolutely knew. If you go back and listen to some of his speeches, he knew the end was near for him. Yet he continued. He was that committed to that cause. I would add, and I would ask leaders to reflect for a sec. How committed are you to what we're doing? What's at stake at this point? Yeah, I believe it's survivability. It's the future of our nation, the future of our globe. Skinny kid out.
Kyle, what are your thoughts on this commitment topic?
I always have to follow Boston. There we go. Always have to follow Boston. But everything that, Chief, you were saying is spot on, right? I think I want to foot stomp again that commitment, right? That's really what it's about. And, you know, in the work that I do with organizations that are outside Space Force, you know, some of our other clients, you know, it's one of the biggest things that we work towards is giving leaders the tools, equipping leaders to make sure that they can commit, to make sure that they do believe in that change that they're about to embark upon, right? And being able to have them share that commitment with others, make it known to everyone, be that role model, right? It's so important. It encompasses all of the different things that we've talked about here today. It builds trust, right? And it takes courage, right? And sometimes it takes vulnerability from leaders to come out and say, well, you know, we're going to do this, and I don't know everything, but we're going to do the best that we can. We're going to get after it, and we're going to learn from our mistakes. And we're going to push it forward, right? fail intelligently, right? Some of the things that we've talked about here today. We do this at KPMG as well. So we actually have our leaders make culture commitments, and everybody here at the firm makes a culture commitment. I'll just briefly share mine. Mine is really about challenging myself and others to make sure that we're critical in any situation, that we're flexible, right? And that we're really valuing innovative thinking over the fear of failure, right? That's really what it's about. And some of the, what I heard from you, Colonel Klock, that's exactly what you're talking about, right? And so with that, having shared my culture commitment, I think I would probably open it up to the rest of the panel. Like, what do you feel most passionate about and committed to from a culture perspective?
Let me Kyle, one step.
Yeah, sure.
My esteemed colleagues touched that. You talked about failure just now.
Yeah.
Super Bowls are won in training camp. You get those reps and sets in, get bruised, get bloodied a little bit. Super Bowls are won in training camp. You fail, I believe, in training. You fail to the left of this is time for the show.
That's right.
The business that we're in, we can say no fail. You put whatever label you want to put on it. But I don't want us to fail when the lights come on and we go, fights on. So let's work hard, let's train hard, let's practice, do whatever we need to. Failure, when it's time for the battle space, failure, we've got to eradicate that, do our best to eradicate that.
That's right.
Championship business.
So I think Kyle was asking y'all what you would have as your commitment to the culture.
So I'll go. Long time as an Army soldier, service before self is what comes to mind. So that's me. I recognize that might not be everyone. That might not be everyone in the armed forces, but I feel like it should be. And again, going back to something that was said much earlier, actions speak louder than words, and demonstrate what you need your guardians to be like. And so I think that's my answer. Service before self.
And Colonel Klock, would you welcome others to give you feedback and challenge you when they see you're not doing that?
Absolutely. It is my personality that I am always looking for feedback, and I have charged my entire organization to tell me how I'm doing, even when I forget to ask or when I'm too busy to ask, how was that, or how was what did you think about that? And so, absolutely, always looking for that.
Great.
Go ahead, James.
All right. What am I committed to? Committed to working towards inspiring our guardians and our folks that support the Space Force to do what they do with compassion in mind, right? I have a 15-year-old son. He's a sophomore. He's in JROTC. I don't know if it's directly because of me or not, but he wants to go to the Naval Academy one day, and that's fine. I mean, you can graduate Naval Academy and maybe come back in the Space Force, so maybe it's just a roundabout way. But why do I use compassion? Because I want people to look at this as more than just a job, right? Service means a whole lot more than that. Why do I reference my son? Because one day I will take this uniform off, and if he does wear the cloth of our nation, I want somebody to treat him with respect, not because of who I am and because they maybe know me, because they most likely won't, but because our service is filled with the sons and daughters of America, right? They're not just a number. They're not just a soldier, sailor, Marine, airman, or guardian that you just point in a direction and you don't care about. You have to care about our folks. I think if we get that right, if we are truly compassionate about the things that we're doing, not just from a mission perspective, because it is ultimately important, but if those people don't feel cared for and they don't believe in the mission and they don't believe that those bosses that lead them, setting the example or not, don't truly have their best interests at heart, they'll be there, but they may not give their all. And even if it's not in war, right, if it's just day-to-day operations, we all carry a different level of weight on our shoulders, whether you see it or not. And if we don't come at that, and we don't lead our guardians, and we don't set up the Space Force with a culture of compassion embedded into it, underlying all those 4 Cs, we will miss the boat on taking care of our people, which is the most important aspect in my mind.
So,
You still have to make a
connectedness.
commitment.
Yes, I am committed. I am committed to connectedness. I believe that policy will always work itself out. But if you don't show people that you give a crap about them and you care about them and their families and what they do every day and the sacrifices that they make, like I spend 2 hours a day in traffic every single day, right? And my guardians and my airmen are doing the same thing. And if we're not connected and they don't have a reason to show up, then they're going to vote with their feet. And a lot of times people talk about, oh, they're just going to leave and go to industry. You know, how do you keep your IT people? They're just eventually going to leave and go to industry. And that's okay. You know why? Because we're all getting after the same fight, just in a different way. And so we owe them an experience to make sure that they don't vote with their feet. If we give them the experience that they expect when they're going to the recruiter to enlist, then we will keep people. But it's that culture that we build that's going to keep them. So we have a responsibility to the sons and daughters of America to make sure that that thing that they think that the Space Force is becomes a reality. And if we don't do that, then we're going to find ourselves civilianized, and you're going to find your space operators who know that they can get paid 3 times as much sitting in the chair next to the one that they're sitting in, being a contractor. They're going to do that, and it's going to be all of our fault. And so if we don't build that culture and we don't make things the way that they're supposed to be, and we don't build that connectedness, they're going to leave and we're going to struggle.
Thank you so much, Chief. And just thank you to our amazing panelists. What a fantastic discussion. If everyone can give them a hearty thank you.
Get out of here.